Imagine you're a pilot preparing to fly a plane from Los Angeles to New York. You enter all the information into the plane's computer and the plane takes off. But you've accidentally entered the direction to New York about 3 degrees to the right of where it should have been. Nobody can really notice it. The plane's nose shifts to the right of where it should have been by only a couple of feet. But across the US, the impact of the slight change will make the plane end up not in New York but all the way in Washington DC. Welcome to Book Club, an ongoing series where I distill and condense the contents of a high-impact book in a video of less than 10 minutes. Today's pick is every self-development fanatic's favorite book and one that has shaped me quite a bit. It's James Clear's Atomic Habits. In a nutshell, it talks about how small habits can have a surprisingly large impact on our lives. Just like the pilot, we don't notice the tiny changes in our lives. Small changes leave a negligible immediate impact. If you're out of shape today and go for a 20-minute jog, you'll still be out of shape tomorrow. If you eat a family-sized pizza for dinner, it won't make you overweight overnight, but compounded over time, these are powerful changes. Eat a pizza every day and after a year, you'll probably weigh a lot more than you do now. Go jogging for 20 minutes every day and eventually you'll be a much healthier person, even though you won't notice the change happening. Imagine it's late at night and you enter your room in pitch dark. You don't even have to think about what to do next. You'll just instinctively reach out for the light switch. I started noticing this when I built this studio setup. My light switch moved from the right side of the door to the left, but I still kept reaching towards the right instinctively. This is an example of a habit. It's a behavior we've repeated so many times that now it just happens automatically. Habits like this dominate our lives, from brushing our teeth to driving our cars. They're immensely powerful. So let's have a look at how they're formed. In the 19th century, a psychologist named Edward Thorndike placed some cats inside a black box. Then, he timed how long it took them to escape. To start with, each cat behaved exactly how you'd expect it to. It desperately looked for a way out. It sniffed and pawed at the corners and clawed at the walls. Eventually, the cat would find a lever that when pressed would open a door to let it out. Thorndike then took the cats that managed to escape and put them back in the box, and kept repeating the process till the cats learned the trick. After about 20 repetitions, instead of scrambling for a minute or more, the cats went straight for the lever and escaped in 6 seconds or less every time. The process of getting out of the box had become habitual for the cats. With this experiment, we see something important. Behaviors that give satisfying consequences, like gaining freedom in this case, tend to be repeated till they become automatic. Since this experiment, we have learned a lot more about habits. Today we know that they are made of 4 elements. First, there's a cue or a trigger to act. So in my example, walking into a dark room cued me to perform an action. Then comes a craving for a change in state. In my case, I wanted to change from darkness to light. Then comes a response or action. In my case, flicking a switch. The final step in the process and the end goal of every habit is the reward. In this case, it's the feeling of mild relief or comfort that comes from being able to see my surroundings. Every habit follows the same process. For example, the habit of drinking coffee each morning. Waking up is the cue, triggering a craving to feel alert. The response action is to drag oneself out of bed and to make a cup, and the reward is feeling wide awake and ready for the day. Let's say you want to learn the guitar. You bought one and picked up the basics, but you just can't get yourself to practice. Now you can use what we learned in the last section. In this case, you want to make your cue to pick up the guitar impossible to miss. So instead of keeping it in the cupboard or in a corner of a spare room, leave it right in the middle of your living room. Make your cue visible and unmissable. This will make it easier to turn your desire to practice into a habit. When it comes to setting good habits, most of us tend to be vague in our intentions. We say, I'm going to eat better or I'm going to learn the guitar, and we simply hope we'll follow through. In such cases, the book recommends using something called implementation intentions. Let's understand this with our guitar example. Instead of telling yourself that you're going to practice guitar sometime this week, tell yourself that on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, when the alarm goes off, the first thing you'll do is pick up the guitar and practice for 20 minutes. By creating an implementation intention, you give yourself both a clear plan and an obvious cue. But you might be wondering if it really works. Can we actually tweak our environments and make it easy for us to form positive habits? To answer this question, let's look at the work of Anne Thorndike, a doctor based in Boston, and in case you're wondering, not related to Edward Thorndike the cat lover. Dr. Anne faced a problem that most health professionals face. She wanted to help her patients improve their diets and their snacking habits. But she also knew that making a conscious choice about eating healthier is hard. It takes a lot of willpower and discipline, and not all of us have unlimited supplies of those. So with her colleagues, Dr. Anne designed a test. She had the hospital cafeteria rearranged. The soda in the refrigerators next to the cash registers was replaced with bottled water, and baskets of bottled water were placed all around the cafeteria. Then over the next 3 months, soda sales dropped down by 11% and bottled water sales shot up by 25%. Simply by creating more queues for people to drink water, Dr. Thorndike and her team were able to get people to make the healthier choice. In other words, they were able to help people make healthier habits without forcing them to make a conscious decision to do so. And the customers did not have to rely on their willpower at all. This is also why the subscribe button is right below the video. It's a good idea to subscribe to channels that you feel will provide learning opportunities to you. In 1954, neuroscientists James Olds and Peter Milner ran an experiment to understand the feeling of desire. Using electrodes, they blocked the release of a neurotransmitter called dopamine in some rats. After that, the lab rats simply lost the will to live. Without dopamine, they had no desire to eat, drink, reproduce, or do anything else. Just a few days later, they all died of thirst. This disturbing story tells us one thing: dopamine is a crucial motivator. When we are about to do something beneficial for our survival, like eating, drinking, or having sex, dopamine is released and we feel good. This feeling motivates us to do the beneficial action again and again. Now the thing is, we don't actually have to do the action to get the hit of dopamine. The mere anticipation of doing something pleasurable is enough to get dopamine flowing. In the brain's reward system, desiring something is the same as getting something. Here's where I'd like to introduce you to the concept of temptation bundling. This is where you take a behavior that you think of as important but find unappealing and link it to a behavior that you're drawn to. This is how you can use dopamine to your advantage when building a new habit. The book talks of the story of Ronan Bryan, an engineering student from Ireland. Ronan knew that he should exercise more, but he did not like working out. However, he did enjoy watching Netflix, so he connected his exercise bike to his laptop and wrote some code that only allowed Netflix to run when he was cycling at a certain speed. By linking exercise to a behavior he was naturally drawn to, he transformed an unappealing activity into a pleasurable one. Now, you don't have to engineer a complex Netflix exercise bike contraption to apply this to your own life. There are easier ways to do this. For example, if you need to work out but want to catch up on the latest A-list gossip, you could commit to only reading magazines while at the gym. Or if you want to watch sports but need to make sales calls, promise yourself 30 minutes of ESPN after you make 10 calls. Another way that we can hack the habit building process is to make it easy. Easy behaviors dominate our lives. We scroll through social media or munch an entire bag of chips because these are easy things to do. On the other hand, doing 100 push-ups or learning Japanese are both pretty tough and take a lot of effort. This is why we don't find ourselves drawn to intense exercise or learning a new language. By making our desired behaviors as easy as possible, we increase the chances of turning them into a daily habit. The first way is by reducing friction, something I talked about in my video about learning to code. The author James Clear has always been bad at sending greeting cards, unlike his wife. And there's a clear reason for this, he says. His wife keeps a box of greeting cards at home, pre-sorted by occasion. This little bit of preparation makes it easier for her to send condolences or congratulations or whatever else. She doesn't have to go out and buy a card when someone gets a job or gets married, and this reduces the friction involved in sending them. Friction is a two-way process. You can reduce friction to turn a behavior into a habit, and you can increase friction if you want to get rid of a certain habit. So if you want to spend less time in front of the TV, just unplug it the next time you use it. This will introduce enough friction to ensure you'll only watch TV when you really want to. The second trick to make a habit easier in the long term is to follow something called the 2-minute rule. The principle is that any behavior can be turned into a habit if it can be done in 2 minutes. So if you want to read more, don't commit to reading an entire book every week. Instead, make a habit out of reading 2 pages per night. Or if you want to practice for a marathon, just commit to putting on your shoes every time you come back from work. Once you've put on your running shoes, you'll probably head out for a run. Similarly, once you've read 2 pages, you'll likely continue reading. Simply getting started is the first and the most important step towards doing something. Let's talk about the story of a very successful public health researcher, Stephen Luby. Back in the 90s, Luby was working on a neighborhood in Karachi, Pakistan, and he was excellent at his job. He reduced diarrhea among local children by 52%, pneumonia by 48%, and skin infections by 35%. And his secret, he said, was having a nice soap. Yes, you heard that right. Luby's huge public health achievements were the results of a nice soap. Luby knew that hand washing and basic sanitation were essential to reducing illnesses. The locals understood this too, but they just weren't turning this knowledge into a habit. Everything changed when Luby worked with Procter & Gamble to introduce a premium soap for free in the neighborhood. Overnight, hand washing was a satisfying experience. The new soap lathered easily and smelled delightful. Suddenly, everyone was washing their hands because now it was a pleasing activity. Stephen Luby's story illustrates the final and the most important rule to behavioral change. Habits need to be satisfying. Making good habits satisfying can be difficult. This is due to human evolution. Today, we live in something known as a delayed return environment. You turn up at the office today, but get paid only at the end of the month. Unfortunately, our brains evolved to cope with an immediate return environment. Our distant ancestors weren't thinking about long-term returns like saving for retirement or sticking to a diet. They were focused on immediate concerns like finding the next meal, seeking shelter, and staying alert enough to ward off any predators nearby. But this focus on immediate returns can lead to bad habits in today's world. Smoking may give you lung cancer in 20 years, but in the moment, it relieves your stress. The immediate hit from the cigarette will likely override the cost to your health in the long term. All this means that when pursuing habits with a delayed return, you need to try to attach some immediate gratification to them. The book mentions a couple that wanted to eat out less, cook more, and save money. These are goals with delayed returns. To give their objectives the immediate return kick, they opened a savings account called Trip to Europe. Every time they avoided a meal out, they transferred $50 to the account. The short-term satisfaction of seeing $50 land in that account provided the immediate gratification they needed to keep them on track for their goals. Okay, so we've learned how to build great habits. But no matter how pleasurable and satisfying we make our habits, we may still fail to stick to them. So let's take a look at how we can maintain these habits. One simple trick to making your habits stick is something called habit tracking. Throughout history, many people have succeeded by keeping a record of their habits. One of the most well-known is Benjamin Franklin. From the age of 20, Franklin kept a notebook where he recorded his progress in his 13 personal virtues. These virtues included aims like avoiding frivolous conversation and always doing something useful. You can do the same by maintaining a simple diary or a calendar and crossing off every day you stick with your chosen behaviors. You'll find this effective. Habit tracking itself is a satisfying habit. The anticipation and action of crossing off each day will feel good and keep you motivated. The next thing I recommend is to develop a habit contract that imposes negative consequences if you fail to stay on track. Brian Harris is an entrepreneur from Nashville and he took his habit contract very seriously. In a contract signed by him, his wife and his personal trainer, he committed to getting his weight down to 90 kilos. He identified specific habits that would help him get there. These included tracking his food intake each day and weighing himself every week. He then set up penalties for not doing those things. If he failed to track food intake, he would have to pay his trainer $100, and if he failed to weigh himself, he would have to pay his wife $500. And the strategy worked, not just by his fear of losing money, but by his fear of losing face in front of two people that mattered to him. Humans are, after all, social animals. We care about what others think about us. Simply knowing that somebody is watching you can be a powerful motivator for success. Of course, keep in mind that these are recommendations of a book for the general public. It doesn't take into account individual challenges. So don't go overboard with this last step and keep your mental health first. A small step could be to start with anonymous accountability. For example, you could comment under this video if there's a habit you want to form, and this comment would be your very first contract. So in this book, we learned that tiny changes in your behavior will not transform your life overnight, but if you turn that behavior into a habit that you perform every single day, it can certainly lead to big impacts. Changing your life is not about making breakthroughs or revolutionizing everything you do. Rather, it's about building a positive system of habits that, when combined, deliver results.